Hi, this is the introductory video for Module 1. And you'll find the PowerPoints for all of the modules saved in a special module section in the course, because there are hyperlinks in the PowerPoints that you won't be able to access when you're viewing this as a video. So the first module has to do with functionalism, but it also involves an overview of some social theories and some sociological terms. So I included that in this presentation as well. Let me experiment with moving myself around. There we go. So in functionalism, society is understood as stable, and all the components are assumed to work together. They function like a biological organism, so that it's possible to study society through scientific methods. And it's possible to look at the functions and to find dysfunctions and to correct them. And it's assumed that this is a neutral process, and that the different functions work toward a homeostasis or a balance. So when something isn't working, when there's a dysfunction, the system can work to correct itself. So it's a completely laissez-faire, hands-off, disinterested kind of observation of society as a natural system. So I thought you should have a definition of socialization. And socialization is a term used in sociology to refer to the process of inculcating people in a society into the cultural norms and values. And they're always the cultural norms and values of the mainstream society. But functionalists use this, critical theorists use this, interpretivists use this. It's a general and useful term. You had a piece from Parsons to read. Parsons is one of the fathers, I guess, of structure functionalism. We just refer to it as functionalism. So the functionalists assume that people act on norms and values, which is the basis of social order. And so this creates harmony. So there is nothing wrong with people following their roles in society. In fact, everyone has to play out their roles unquestionably, actually, or unquestioningly, I should say, in order for society to work. So successful socialization then means that all the individuals internalize the norms and values of the society. It becomes our individual values and norms too, and that's how society works. And the process usually takes place when adults teach small children right from wrong. We say that the family is the first agent of socialization, or the first institution of society that works in socialization. But all the institutions of society work to socialize people, and we're here to study schools in particular as institutions of socialization. So you should see some of the core American values. This is as presented by two sociologists that I've used when I taught Intro to Sociology. And I would say that they're still relevant today, even though this book, I think, was from 2007. So you see anywhere from achievement and success, individualism, but also freedom, humanitarianism, democracy, equality. So sometimes these values are at odds with one another. So think about individualism and equality. But think about science and technology and religiosity. Not always have to be in conflict, but sometimes are. Think about freedom and equality. So individual freedom means for some people that the government doesn't interfere with what I want to do, but equality usually means that the government has to interfere in order to ensure that everyone is being treated equally, or that one person isn't taking advantage of another person. So here's a little reminder maybe for you, or introduction to what norms are. And norms are expectations for behavior. So sometimes the norms are codified and then they become laws. So norms are formed through socialization in the same way that we think of peer pressure or social contagion. So this is what we believe, even though we're not forced to believe. The norms that are codified into laws, there are serious repercussions if we violate those particular norms. And then you can see that they're specific to some groups. You've got your core norms of how people should behave, and then we think of different behaviors as being acceptable for, say, an 80-year-old grandmother or a 20-year-old, right? We unfortunately think of some behaviors as being more appropriate for one gender or the other, or being more appropriate for people of one race than the other. But this is functionalism, so we're staying neutral here. We're just observing that. And then mores are those approvals or disapprovals. So the awarding or removal of status, usually praise, smiles, encouragement. These are customary and enforced by social sanctions. So these don't have anything to do with the force of the state or lawmaking body to make you do these things. But most of the mores that we have then eventually become laws. So we don't, there are laws against harassing people, which is a more, right? Also enforced by social sanction. There are laws against stealing, against assault, against murder, against reckless driving, against interfering with someone's peaceful existence, right? So they most of them become laws as well. But then there are other mores that haven't become laws. So we disapprove of people who make fun of other people, but there's no law against it. So here are some norms that are in operation, maybe in schools that you would see. So the communication of specific group norms in a situated society, so Western middle-class hetero male culture. Boys don't hit girls. That's not a law. This is one of our values that are norms. It's also a more, right? So there's negative sanctions against boys who hit girls. So you can see that the underlying collective value is that women should be protected. Maybe there's some underlying belief that has to do with women being weaker. And we can find some biological support for that. There are sanctions, negative sanctions for boys that hit girls. They could be considered sissies, cowards, and then adults, abusers. The underlying implication here is that it's somehow okay, though, for girls to hit boys. Is it, though? But think about what we communicate in these norms. And then the related overarching social norm here is that people do not hit each other unprovoked in non-combat, non-sport situations. So we value that, not interfering with each other socially, but you see how in specific cultural contexts you get smaller norms derived from this larger norm. And this might be a universal. I don't know if there are cultures where there would be this, there wouldn't exist this particularly gendered norm. Just so you can see the social institutions of industrial and post-industrial society and some of their needs, statuses, values, and norms. And you see that education is one of them. The family, like I said, is the first one. Medicine, or the system of medicine, or our healthcare system, economic system, religion. So if you look at education, what some of their values are academic honesty, having good grades, but then for kids also having some kind of status as being cool, right? Some of the norms is that you're supposed to do your homework, students. Teachers are supposed to prepare their lectures, and you're not supposed to turn in people who cheat. But from the perspective of the school, people shouldn't be cheating or shouldn't be helping other people to cheat as well. So there's conflicting norms. Sometimes it's hard to be a student when you're obeying the norms regulating the behavior of what it means to be a good friend versus what it means to be a good student. And we call that role strain or role conflict. See? And that's on the right, the role conflict there. For some groups of students, it's more severe and more severely sanctioned by their peers than for others. You want to do well in class, but you don't want to make other students look bad. There are some groups of students also who police each other not to do well in school or not to appear to be interested in doing well in school. That's a really tough position to be in when you're a student. Whereas role strain just recognizes that everyone has multiple roles. So you're not ever just a student. You're, for a lot of you, a teacher, an employee, a friend, perhaps a parent, a partner, a daughter. We have multiple roles, and sometimes we're not sure which ones have priority. So sexual reproduction, again, a neutral term. You hear more of the conflict theorists using this, but I was just reminded today that Robert Putnam, who straddles between functionalism and maybe conflict theory a little bit. He recognizes that there are dysfunctions in society, let's put it that way. So functionalists see social reproduction as the means by which we reproduce our social systems. And conflict theorists are going to focus on how we reproduce inequalities in our systems. But this is, again, looking at this from a functionalist point of view, we're looking at the social system and how does it perpetuate itself. And so we're interested in schooling, so we ask what's the role of schools in this process. And well, the schools socialize people by the norms of society to prepare them to participate in the economic, social, and political systems that we have. And then they also stratify or select people for certain social strata. So schooling works as a selection mechanism. We select people who are going to go on to college and people who are going to go on to trade in the military. And by allowing people to fail or pushing them out or failing them, however you look at that, we prepare people for lower wage jobs and for struggle in our economy. So the functionalists, though, assume that we're operating under a meritocracy in school, meaning that people are rewarded on the basis of their efforts alone, basis of their skills alone. Of course, conflict theorists are going to see that there's something else in work. There's some discrimination based on different social statuses, but the functionalists see the meritocracy. Everyone is thought to be equal, assumed to be equal, and assumed to be operating from the same starting place. So here is a graph that shows different arrangements for socioeconomic classes. So we might just look at lower, middle, upper, but then the Gilbert-Hall model has several other classes here too. And this is at least from 2007, possibly a lot earlier. So don't get hung up with the absolute numbers, right? So this is a range of income. Functionalists argue that there's a certain degree of inequality in society as a whole, and then that's natural and necessary. We couldn't operate without a certain degree of inequality. So there has to be some people doing different jobs. We need people to do different kinds of jobs. And because of their relative value to our society, we remunerate them differently. So that's always going to be there. And some people look at this as in an evolutionary kind of way, meaning that where you start in a lower socioeconomic class, you should be able to advance that through effort, through education, or through time, through generations. And some people observe this about immigrant groups who always come in at the bottom and then over generations move on up. And then, of course, conflict theorists have something to say about that. But we're looking at the way society functions, right, neutrally. And then rewards in the form of income, status, privilege, or power must be provided in order to induce people to carry out the work required of them. So that's the justification for the inequality in remuneration, material remuneration, so wage, salary, benefits, and things like that. So one of the authors you were asked to read was Basil Bernstein, and he gave us our ideas of class codes, which has to do with the way that parents or families speak to their children differently depending in their social class. And it has to do with not anything inherent in the people themselves, but in their experience of reality and their expectations for the future, to some degree their time constraints, but usually the material reality of where they're living and what they do. So he referred to the way of speaking of the middle and upper classes as elaborated codes. So you're going to have language patterns that provide context, fuller explanations. They use the standard American dialect if we're talking about American English, or the standard dialect of whatever language we're talking about. They have a more extensive vocabulary because they're modeled. The students are modeled, or parents model for their children, and they encourage them and they ask them for more details. So if you look at the picture, you see the teacher asks the class, "Can you tell me what the elaborated code is?" And the child that's using the elaborated code pattern tells us that Bernstein suggested it's the formal language listed in school classrooms, in writing essays, and for job applications. Then the restricted codes are those used by the working or lower class, and they assume some kind of insider knowledge. They might use jargon, non-standard dialect, and words that people wouldn't know, or that's assumed in the context. So the child using the restricted code said, "It's the stuff we did the other day." So they're assuming correctly that everyone else was present in class and talking about the topic. So why shouldn't you be able to use this shorthand? And probably with friends, you would use this, but here the child who grew up speaking with the elaborated codes also internalized the norms for classroom response to teachers that are more highly valued in schools. So you can see how the teacher's estimation of a child's commitment or skills or even character would be influenced by the way that they speak. But both are functional. Both are functional for the social class reality and anticipated futures of their present situations. So that's all we have for the slides for functionalism. The next presentation is going to be on conflict theory.